The moment my old RV rolled onto that familiar gravel road, the crisp morning air from Lake Michigan rushed in through the cracked window. But mixed with that October chill wasn't the usual scent of pine. It was the sharp, heavy stench of diesel and concrete dust. Right then, my chest sank like a rock had dropped straight into it. I knew that smell. I'd breathed it in 1,000 times back when I was a firefighter, and it never meant anything good. My foot lifted off the gas without me even thinking. The winding road through the pines opened into a clearing that looked down on the still lake. But instead of the quiet scene I always expected, with the cabin porch and the calls of water birds, I saw a yellow excavator swinging its steel arm down into the foundation of my home. I froze. The porch where my wife and I used to drink coffee every morning was nothing but splintered wood. The living room wall had collapsed, and the window frame leaned sideways like a lonely gravestone. What stole the air from my lungs was the piano, our 25th anniversary gift, the one I gave my wife buried under bricks, white keys scattered like broken teeth. In that instant, I knew this wasn't some accident. It wasn't a simple mistake. This was destruction on purpose. And what shook me even more was hearing people say I owed dues to an association I never once agreed to join. My name is David Lawson. For 30 years, I was a firefighter and later the station chief in Genesee County, Michigan. That job taught me how to stay calm in the worst chaos. But that morning, watching my lake house being crushed to pieces, I felt like I lost everything. That house wasn't just four walls. I designed every room myself, from the pine beams to the red roof tiles. My wife Rebecca and I built it more than 20 years ago, back when we were young and full of dreams. The 12 acres by the lake were where we chose to start a new life, far from city noise, close to nature and peace. Rebecca loved music. Every night she sat at the piano in our living room, her fingers gliding across the keys, the sound carrying out over the lake. To me, that was the most beautiful music in the world, a symphony of love and home. When she passed away from cancer 5 years ago, that house became the place where I held on to her memory and to the music that had carried us through the hardest days. That's why I never sold the land, even though developers knocked on my door more times than I can count. I always told them, this is my family's land. No price can buy it. And because of that decision, I ended up on someone's list. 6 weeks ago, before leaving to visit my daughter and my 2 grandkids, I locked the doors, cleaned up the yard, and left with a calm heart. I believed that when I came back, I'd hear the waves breaking on the rocks and the pines whispering in the wind. But instead of that welcome, all I found was dust and cold steel. Before everything fell apart, my life was as calm as the lake in the early morning. I usually woke up at 6, made myself a cup of black coffee, and stepped out onto the wooden porch, where the first sunlight slipped through the tall pines. No car horns, no neighbors arguing, just the sound of diving birds and the gentle splash of waves against the rocks. In retirement, I found joy in the little things. Planting lavender by the fence, fixing the paddle on my old wooden boat, calling my daughter now and then, listening to the grandkids talk about school. At night, I'd turn on an old music player and play Rebecca's recordings. Her piano filled the cabin, blending with the crickets outside. That was how I kept the house alive, still warm with her presence. Every once in a while, I drove my old pickup into the nearest town, Flint. I'd grab a few things from the hardware store or stop at a roadside diner. Folks there all knew me. They'd greet me with a nod. "Mornin', Chief." They still called me Chief, even though I'd been retired for years. Deep down, I always believed I was right not to sell my land, not to join that new subdivision across the lake. Their houses all looked the same, with neat paved driveways and white fences lined up in a row. Me, I had my own wide open space. I used to think that life would last me till the end. But as I learned too soon, peace can turn to ashes with just one greedy hand. That morning, the lake was still under a thin veil of mist. The sun had just edged over the horizon, lighting up the old pines. I planned to park the RV, grab a shower, then sit on the porch with a hot coffee. But the second the winding road opened into the clearing, that picture blew apart. A giant excavator was roaring across my front lawn. Its steel arm had just slammed down, kicking up clouds of dust and splinters. Next to it, A scrap truck idled while workers in reflective vests and yellow hard hats moved around like they belonged there. I hit the brakes hard, and the RV shook. Before the engine even died, I threw the door open and jumped down. My boots hit the gravel. My chest felt hollow, stunned and angry at the same time. Right in front of me, the cabin by the lake, the place Rebecca and I spent whole summers building, was nothing but wreckage. The living room wall still stood like a crooked headstone. The window frame where I used to hang a wind chime was just shards of glass catching cold light. But what nearly dropped me to my knees was Rebecca's piano. It teetered in the rubble, dark wood split wide, white keys flung everywhere like broken teeth. I stepped closer, hands shaking, my throat tight. Memories rushed in the winter nights when Rebecca played Moon River, notes drifting over the lake while I sat by a small fire. Now all of it was ash. I shouted, voice cracking. Stop. This is my house. A man in an orange vest walked over, clipboard in hand. He looked tired, like I was just a minor inconvenience. You're not allowed to be here. This is a lawful demolition. I stared at him. Lawful demolition? This is my home. I've lived here more than 20 years. He sighed, flipped a couple of pages, and said in a flat voice, You didn't pay the HOA fees. Notices were posted several times. We have a demolition order. Right then, my blood went cold. My heart pounded so hard my ears rang. I clenched my fists and forced my voice steady. I've never joined any HOA. This land is private. It was legally split off before that subdivision even existed. You're lying. Instead of backing down, he just shrugged and tossed out one short line. You're a member now. Those words hung in the air, heavier than the dust rising from the broken brick. In that moment, I knew I wasn't facing a paperwork mistake. I was staring at a setup. And the fight to get back not just my house, but my family's name, had just officially begun. When the workers left for lunch, I stood in the dusty pile of rubble. It wasn't just pain I felt. It was a cold anger that seeped into my bones. I needed answers. I walked down to the mailbox at the end of the gravel road. The box was stuffed with flyers and bills. Tucked in the stack were 2 envelopes with the Heron Lake Estates HOA logo, the HOA I'd never joined. I tore open the first one. Inside was a member dues owed notice for nearly $3,000, with a warning about liens and enforcement if it wasn't paid. The second envelope hit me harder. Minutes from an HOA meeting 4 months ago that showed a vote to reincorporate my parcel to preserve the lakeside aesthetic. A red line underlined a note. Majority approved Lawson's land, now officially part of HOA. I laughed out loud. A handful of strangers sitting in a room could vote and turn 20 years of my work into theirs? No way. I called the county land office. A staffer named Emily answered, still sounding sleepy. I read her my parcel number and asked them to check. After a few clicks, she said, hesitantly, Mr. Lawson, records show your parcel is totally separate. It's not part of any association. Your property taxes are paid. I let out a breath. Relief hit me until Emily added, there's one thing. Our system shows a demolition permit signed by you, David Lawson. I'll send the PDF to your email. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. When I opened the file, my heart nearly stopped. At the bottom of the permit, the owner's signature was my name. It looked like my handwriting, but too neat, with no pressure, no quirks like a copy. I remembered signing a digital signature at the county office 8 years ago when I got a roof repair permit after a hailstorm. They took that signature, copied it, and pasted it onto the demolition permit. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. No question about it now. This wasn't a mistake. It was organized forgery. I walked back through the wreckage, stepping over splintered wood and broken glass. One question spun in my head. Who did this? My eyes landed across the lake. There, a new subdivision had popped up in the last few years, identical houses, white fences, perfectly trimmed lawns, a sign reading Heron Lake Estates, a premier community. At the center of it all was Karen Mitchell, the HOA president. I'd met her a few times at county meetings about roads and fire safety. She was polite, but her eyes showed a sharp greed. I remember her offering to buy my lakeside lot for a luxury homes project. I said no. Maybe that's when the quiet feud started. Sitting in the RV, staring at the still water, it hit me. This fight isn't just about the house. It's about standing up to a small, powerful machine that'll bend the law for its own gain. And the one smiling like she'd already won was Karen. They think I'm just an old man alone. They're wrong. I led hundreds through brutal wildfires. I know how to find the spark, and I'm going to find the root of this fraud. That night, I sat alone in the RV parked at the entrance to the property, laptop on the little dinette, the generator humming outside. Through the window, the wreckage lay quiet, like an open wound in my chest. But I knew this. Feeling sorry wouldn't fix anything. Only the truth would tear down the people behind this. I started with the simplest thing, email. I searched my inbox for any notices from Heron Lake Estates. Nothing. Not even in spam. They said they'd posted warnings for 6 months, but there wasn't a single digital trace. Next, I checked the security camera account. Years ago, after some strangers were sneaking around my boat dock, I put in motion sensor cameras. They record to both a hard drive and the cloud. I went through 6 months of footage. I saw the mail carrier stop by, deer wandering in the yard, a raccoon rifling through the trash. But there was no one posting notices or hanging papers on my door. In short, the HOA was lying. I wrote it down. No notice. No email. Fraud. Then I went back to the demolition permit PDF Emily sent. For a lot of folks, a fake signature would be enough. But I used to be a fire chief. I look for clues in little things. Every PDF has metadata, the edit history, which computer made it. I opened the properties. What I found made my skin crawl. The original permit was created at the county office, but a copy had been edited on a personal computer with the username K.Mitchell. Timestamp, 2:07 a.m., a Tuesday. I sat there, stunned. No doubt left. Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, had forged the documents to tear down my house. But I needed more than digital proof. I needed something you could hold. The next morning, I drove to the county office and asked for all inspection reports about my house. A young clerk handed me a paper, an emergency inspection report, signed by an inspector named Tom Jensen. I looked closer. Something was off. I'd met Jensen a few times back when I was still working. He signs his name with an E in the middle, Jensen. The report said Johnson. Could a man misspell his own name on an official form? No way. Another forgery. I texted a photo to an old friend, Frank Stitch Harris, a retired construction engineer who'd worked with me on fire scenes. He replied in minutes. This is amateur forgery. I'll come check the site. The next day, Frank drove up in his old pickup with a small drone and a worn hard hat. He flew the drone low, took shots of every corner of the foundation. After about an hour, he looked at me and said, "David, your house shows no signs of structural failure. The foundation's solid. There's no technical reason to demolish it. This isn't an accident. This is execution." Hearing the word execution set my blood boiling. But I also felt something else. I had an ally. I wasn't just one old man against a whole machine anymore. I started building my own case of file that would name every person in that HOA. Frank Stitch Harris wasn't just an old construction engineer. He was a friend I trusted. After he flew the drone around the foundation and printed the shots, he circled the load points and shook his head. "David, you built this place like a fortress. They'll say it's deteriorated? No way. I'll back you up with my professional opinion." Hearing that, something lifted in me. I wasn't alone anymore. But I knew Frank and me weren't enough. Karen Mitchell had been running that neighborhood for years. If I wanted to expose her, I needed proof from people who'd been hurt. I remembered a paper Sheriff Robert Hayes, an old friend and the county sheriff, had quietly handed me. A list of phone numbers for homeowners who'd complained about the HOA but were too scared to speak up. I opened the list and dialed the first number. A man named Paul Reynolds answered, his voice shaking. "They went after you too? They fined me $2,000 for a fence that stuck out 6 inches. 6 inches. I know my property line. But they threatened to sue, so I paid just to make it stop." The second call was to an older woman, Margaret Hill. Her voice broke as she spoke. "They threatened to take my house because I painted my garage door beige, not the approved color. I've lived here 40 years. I painted those doors myself. Now I'm fined for not being aesthetic." I listened and wrote everything down. Each story showed the same pattern. Karen Mitchell and the HOA using power to shake down residents. The one that stuck with me came from Mark Evans. He met me in his backyard. His wife was pushing his frail mother in a wheelchair. Mark pointed to the high porch steps and said, voice tight, "I wanted to build a ramp so my mother-in-law could get in and out." Karen rejected it. She said the wood I wanted isn't on the approved materials list. I argued, They sent threatening letters, and I had to stop. My mother-in-law's been stuck inside for almost a year. My throat tightened. I pictured Rebecca if she were still alive. She'd need that ramp someday. The thought lit my anger, but it also hardened my resolve. I put my hand on Mark's shoulder. Get ready. As long as I'm around, no one's going to stop your family from building that ramp. His eyes brightened. For the first time all afternoon, I saw hope. That night, I went back to the RV with a growing file. Foundation photos, forged reports, PDF metadata, and neighbors' statements. This community wasn't just bullied with fines. They were silenced by fear of threats, fear of losing their homes, fear of extra fees. But now it was different. They knew I'd stand up. I had Frank, and I had the facts. Staring at the still lake, I whispered to myself, Karen thinks she runs this place. She doesn't know I've got the kindling to burn that fake throne down. The day of the HOA meeting was cold, Michigan cold, with wind cutting through rows of red maples. I wore a thick coat and carried a fat stack of files Frank had helped me organize. There were tax maps, the forged demolition permit, photos showing the foundation intact, and a technical analysis report. Each packet was neatly clipped together, 10 copies total. I planned to hand one to every board member and any resident who showed up. The meeting room was inside the Heron Lake Estates clubhouse, a chilly building, beige walls, folding chairs in straight rows. The air smelled like cold coffee and bleach. About 15 residents sat scattered around, worn out. At the head table sat 5 HOA board members, and in the middle was Karen Mitchell. She wore a dark blue suit, lips pinched into a polite smile, eyes scanning everyone. I sat at the back, waiting. Karen opened the meeting in a sharp tone. First, we'll discuss fence height rules. Then, we'll cover a proposal to change the flowers in the little park. Remember, it's all about maintaining aesthetic uniformity. She said it like she ran a tiny kingdom. When her eyes landed on me, that smile froze. I saw irritation flash across her face. At new business, I stood up. The room turned. Karen planted her hands on the table, voice sour. Mr. Lawson, this meeting is for HOA members. You have no standing to be here. I walked slowly to the table and set the thick stack in front of her. I'm not here as a member. I'm here as the homeowner you illegally destroyed. The room went quiet. I handed out the packets to the residents. Pages rustled. People bent over and read. It's all here, I said loud and steady. Page 1. The tax map showing my land is not part of the HOA. Page 2. The demolition permit with a forged signature copied from a 2014 county file. Page 3. A fake inspection report with the inspector's name misspelled. And here, I held up the drone photo. The foundation is sound. There was no safety reason to demolish. Murmurs spread through the room. An older board member pushed his chair back, his face pale. Karen kept a forced smile, voice thin. These documents aren't verified. This is slander. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled a small recorder from my pocket and pressed play. Karen's voice filled the room, clear, from the internal forum recording I'd found. If he won't sell, we'll force a compliance lien. We'll make a reason. Trust me, we'll make it look legit. A gasp ran through the residents. The room fell silent. Karen's face shifted from pale to flushed, eyes wide with panic. I took another step forward, calm. The biggest proof isn't in papers or recordings. It's in the ground beneath your feet. Karen frowned. What are you saying? I took a breath and looked her dead in the eye. 20 years ago, when the developer went bankrupt, the assets were auctioned. People bought lots to build houses. I did something different. I bought the roads, the water, the sewer, the power infrastructure, and the rights to use that infrastructure. In short, I own the roads you drive on every day. I own the sewer, water, electric, and cable you use. An uproar started. A woman blurted, "Oh my God, does that mean you can?" I nodded. Yes, I can revoke easements if agreements are violated. Tearing down my house was a severe violation. The HOA lawyer, a thin man named Charles Bennett, jumped up, voice shaking. This is overreach. No court would allow. I cut him off and, for the first time, let a small smile show. I don't need the court. I filed to terminate easements this morning. From now on, the road into this neighborhood is my private road. I'll let residents in for 48 hours to get ready. After that, a gate goes up. Shouts rose. What about the school bus? What about mail? We'll be trapped. But the anger turned away from me and toward Karen. A man pointed at her. You knew he owned this land all along, didn't you? You hid it from us. Karen stammered, her voice drowned in the rising tide of outrage. Some people stood and left, faces full of disappointment. I let them react for a moment. Then I said slowly, I don't want to be a new tyrant. I want justice. This community has been squeezed by unreasonable rules and the greed of a few. Now you have a chance to make it right, but not with Karen Mitchell in charge. I scanned the crowd. A few nodded. Some held hands. For the first time I saw them look at me not with suspicion, but with hope. In that moment, I knew the balance of power had shifted. Karen was no longer queen of that fake little kingdom. And I, the man they thought defeated, now held the proof to wipe out that whole empire. 2 days after that chaotic meeting, while the crew I'd hired was setting gate posts at the entrance to Heron Lake Lane, a police car pulled up. In the passenger seat was Karen Mitchell, hollow-eyed but still pointing wildly at me. An officer stepped out, voice firm. Mr. Lawson, we've received a complaint that you're blocking a public road and trapping residents. I didn't get angry. I opened the RV door, invited them in, and laid out the papers on the table. Tax maps, infrastructure ownership, and the file of forged evidence. The officer flipped through each page, his face growing heavier. When he reached the metadata showing K. Mitchell, he let out a quiet breath and muttered, Wire fraud forgery conspiracy. He turned to his partner and lowered his voice, just enough for me to hear. This is beyond local. We need to loop in the feds. Karen screamed. This land belongs to the community. He's lying. Arrest him. But no one moved. Instead, the officer looked at me, serious. Mr. Lawson, this case now falls to the FBI. Be ready to cooperate. A few weeks later, the final blow landed on Karen Mitchell. During an emergency HOA meeting, while she was scrambling to hold on to power, four federal agents walked in. The room went silent as they called her name and snapped handcuffs on right in front of the neighbors. Karen struggled, but all she got back were looks of contempt. Her little empire didn't end with gunfire. It ended with the cold click of handcuffs. After that, everything moved fast. With the forged documents, extortion letters, and shady financial records, Karen and her partners faced a stack of federal charges. The HOA's insurance company was forced to settle, paying me nearly $1 million, enough to rebuild my home. When the judge's gavel fell, I walked out a different man. I wasn't the one who lost everything anymore. I was back in control. By the next spring, a new house stood on the old foundation. I kept the original look, but added a solid storm shelter and a gentle ramp to the front door, so if older friends or anyone in a wheelchair came by, no one would ever be blocked by some aesthetic rule. Neighbors started coming to me, asking to build something new together, not an HOA, just a voluntary agreement to chip in for road upkeep. No more petty tyrant board. No more ridiculous fines. Just people living side by side, with mutual respect. On the day we opened the new house, I built that ramp with Mark Evans for his mother-in-law. We finished it over a weekend, laughing as we worked, nothing like the old suffocating days. When she rolled down the ramp for the first time, her eyes lit up. I looked out at the sun glittering on the lake and felt the weight lift. Karen Mitchell once thought power lived in HOA votes. In the end, the truth proved something else. Real power lives in the ground under your feet and in the resolve to never bow. One afternoon, when the new house was almost finished, I found a small USB hidden inside the broken piano lid. I plugged it into my laptop, and the screen lit up with Rebecca's face. Her smile was as gentle as ever, and her familiar voice filled the room. My loves, everything will change someday, but one thing will never be lost. It's what we build inside ourselves. Things break, but they'll never take away what matters. Hearing her words, my chest tightened not with pain anymore, but with resolve. I knew this fight wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about protecting her memory and the values we built together. The community around the lake has changed. People who once lived in fear now hold their heads high. No more absurd fine letters. No more threatening knocks at the door. Instead, weekends are spent clearing pathways, fixing fences, or just sitting on porches talking. A simple freedom, but the kind that matters. I sat on the new wooden porch, watched the sun sink behind the pines, and felt the cool breeze off the lake. The house had been taken, but truth and determination brought it back stronger than ever. And I told myself, real power doesn't come from harsh bylaws or a chair at the head of a table. Real power comes from standing up for what's right. If this story makes you think about your own home or how your community is run, share it. Because sometimes, one spark of truth is enough to burn down a kingdom built on lies.